Okay, this video looks at problem solving. It's a strategy of mine that I've used with students for a number of years and it's been quite successful for some students. What I will say at this point is it doesn't suit everybody, but you do need to give it a go to see whether or not it will work for you. It isn't something that you will need to use on every single question. It's designed to help you get started on those questions where the wording is a bit too much or there's a lot of facts and it's hard to process it, and it's where you have those questions that you really don't know where to get started and don't think you can, and that maybe you might ignore the question and move on and not gain any marks. So it works really well for the more wordy questions that you sort of designed at like 4 or 5 or 6 marks. So give it a try. Okay, when you look online and you look at problem solving, you get a general sort of outline of what you're meant to do. So, for example, read the problem, understand what's being asked, make a plan to solve the most difficult step, execute the plan, and check your solution for reasonableness and no silly answers, for example. Well, that's all very well, but it's very simplistic. And most common errors that you get within maths are being able to identify, first of all, what is actually being asked, being able to understand that, because you get too much information to be able to hold that all in your mind all at once, and to then make a plan to solve that difficult step. If you haven't processed the information and you haven't got a grip of exactly what's asked and what's needed, it's really hard then to get started to actually solve it. And this sort of strategy is designed to go through it one step at a time and hopefully leading you to solve the whole thing. And sometimes you sort of get to the end of the question using this strategy without realizing it, and you've actually completed a whole question that you thought you couldn't answer. So let's have a look at that. But beforehand, there is something in particular that I want you to focus on, and I want you to do this with every question that you do. 6 steps to success. So I do not want you to do any maths at all until you have completed all 6 steps of this question on those wordy questions. So on the first one, you simply read it. Just read the question, that's all. You do not write anything down, you do not highlight anything, you just give your full attention to reading the question. So if you're a student that tends to dive into the question really quickly, pull out numbers and start doing things straight away, and then sort of gets lost halfway through, hopefully this strategy will slow you down and give yourself a chance to process the information in the right order, and make sure you do the right maths and make sure you identify the right facts and you don't miss those hidden gems that are in the question. So after reading it once, then that would be the time to go through and highlight it. So underline it, circle it, use a highlighter. Highlighters are actually allowed in the exam. So go through, don't highlight everything, just pull out your key facts. So we'll go through that a little bit in my example in a moment. Then in a minute, the part that's particular to this method is I'm going to get you to transfer that information out of the main body of the question into a more structured space so that you can separate out the information in a way that helps you process things better. I'm going to be using post-it notes today, and we'll talk later on about how that can transfer into the exam itself. Then I would like you to read it again. Still not doing any maths, by the way, not a sausage, not a tiny bit of math is being done here. You're purely processing information. And I'm going to get you to read it again. I want you to go through this time, making sure you haven't missed out any key words. There's little words around, meaning the edge, or just things like that. Some keywords that you might have missed when you're pulling out that initial information, and make sure that information then gets onto your grid as well. The 6th step that you have to do before you start doing any maths is look for the hidden facts. And I'll talk about that more in the context of the question that I'm going to talk through with you. All right, I'll come back to this 2 or 3 times during this video to remind you, but read, highlight, transfer, read, hidden facts. Do those, no maths until they're complete, no maths at all. Do you get that? Okay, no maths at all until you completed those processes, to make sure you've pulled out all the information before you let your mind run ahead. I think I've said that often enough now. Okay, so here's the question we're going to use in this video. Mo manages track repairs. He needs to order 60 tons of stone for track repair. The stones are sold in full cuboid containers. A full container of stones is 80 centimetres by 80 centimetres by 70 centimetres. Mo knows that 1 metre cubed of the stone weighs 1.8 tonnes. Each container of stone costs £45.16. Mo wants to order the smallest number of containers of stones as possible. Work out the total cost of the containers of stone Mo needs to order, and then use the box below. So 6 marks there. And I don't know about you, but by the time you get to the final question, all the information you've been given before sort of blurs a little bit. But we have got a general context here. We've got a general idea of what the question is looking for. So you can write this down. You can just make a mental note of it if you want to, depending on you and how you learn or what you need to do. So generally, we know we've got to look for the cost of 60 tonnes of stone. We know it's sold in containers, but we don't know how many containers. So that's the gist of the overall question without looking at the finer detail. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go through that information and pull one fact out at a time by highlighting it. Okay, so we go through here. We've highlighted first that he needs to order 60 tonne of stone. We've highlighted the obvious information and that you've got the dimensions of the containers. The fact that 1 metre cubed weighs 1.8 tonnes. The fact that 1 container of stone costs £45.16. The fact that he wants to order the smallest number of containers of stone. And then we've got the question itself, which is the total cost of the containers. So at a glance, that looks like we have all the information that we need. But as in the line above the question where it says Mo wants to order the smallest number of containers of stone as possible, there's no numbers in there. But there are words in there that are really important to take note of when answering the question. We need to know what the smallest number is, which means that he doesn't want to buy too many. In real life, quite often we'll buy more than we need so we don't have to bother doing the specific maths. But he wants to order the smallest number of containers possible, so we have to be precise. But let's go back through again. There's more information here. The stones are sold in full containers. That means if you get 4.5 containers or 6.5 in your answer, you will have to make a decision about how many you will buy, because you can't buy half a container. You have to buy a full one. There's also a mention here in the middle of 1 metre cubed of the stone weighing 1.8 tonnes. We highlighted the whole fact, but 1 metre cubed is the hidden fact that we were talking about. So remember on my list, the last thing was to look for the hidden facts, and this is one of those. And just a reminder that each means 1. I think we probably all know that when we think about it, but when we scan a question and we're looking for numbers, we take the cost as £45.16. It's remembering that represents 1 container. And we're now going to take each of those facts and pop them onto the post-it notes. So here you go. So if you notice on the post-it note, I haven't written the whole sentence. I've just written needs 60 tonnes. So keep your information brief, but make sure that you have enough information on the post-it note that you recognise what it means. Okay, so this is it specifically needs 60 tonnes. That's not what he's got, that's what he needs. So let's pop that post-it note on our desk. And the next fact are the dimensions of the container. Pop that on the post-it note. Okay, transfer that over. And you notice here, I've just put that that's 1 container. That means that I now know that that's what it represents, just to be completely clear, so that we can keep that fresh in your mind. We've got the fact that 1 metre cubed of stone represents 1.8 tonnes. That again goes on our desk. Each container costs £45.16. And again, you've got it quite wordy there, so you might choose to change that to 1 container. So each container is the same as 1 container. There you go. And again, that goes on our desk. Let's keep going. Mo wants to order the smallest number of containers. So pop that on there. Okay, he doesn't want to overbuy. He wants to buy as close to what he needs as possible, but as long as he's got enough. Again, that goes on there. Working out, we've got meters cubed, mentioned that hidden fact that we talked about. That means that's volume. So you'll have to think about what volume is and how you calculate that. And we do also have the fact that they need to be full containers. And just to explain that a little bit more to yourself, when you come back to the post-its later, that means it's whole numbers of containers, no part containers. And the final post-it note comes for the final question of total cost of the containers. Okay. Now, you might also have had a question that says, is somebody right or wrong? So you'd need a yes or a no. So you might have a post-it note with a Y and an N on it so that you answer that question, because a lot of students will miss getting the final mark on their question because they haven't said yes or no to it. Or there might be a request for you to do a check if you're working. So you might create a post-it note for a check. And the idea being that it's there on your post-it note, and until you've ticked it off, it's not complete. So those little those little marks at the end of a big question that can get you, could just get you the pass that sometimes you forget to do. This strategy will hopefully mean that you won't forget those. Okay, so we have our information here on the screen. You can see I've got a box, another box here under hidden facts. It's because there's another hidden fact you need to look for. We've got meters cubed in this question, so that's volume. It could have been meters squared, which would be area. Or you could have different units, so you have a conversion, and you won't necessarily be told that you need to do those. The examiner will expect you to recognise what they mean, and you would recognise what to do. So if you look at every single question and you say, what are the hidden facts, and go looking for them, there may be none, but there will always be a question in level 1 or level 2 paper where either conversion is needed or area or volume, and they don't specifically tell you, so you have to look for the clues. Okay, so now what we have in front of us are all the facts from the exam question. Okay, so go back over it, read the exam question again, check that you haven't missed anything at all, read it a final time before you start answering the question, double check that you've got all of the hidden facts, which is number 6 on a list, and then you know that you haven't missed anything, or you hope you haven't missed anything. So here we go, we've got our post-it notes and the total cost there at the end too. So, and also having the overview there if you want to. So I've just sort of tidied that screen up a little bit. And what are the boxes? They're designed to enable you to focus on a limited amount of information at the time, rather than having to delve through the wordiness of the question. Now, we've used post-it notes here. I've had students do that in exams. They were able to take post-it notes into the exams as long as they can show the post-it notes were empty. But the downside of using post-it notes in the exam is you would have to copy everything onto the exam paper. However, if you do this with post-it notes first, you might then find it easier to do on an exam paper afterwards. So I then have students that translated the post-it notes into drawing grids on their exam paper instead. So they might create 8, maybe for level 2 you might need up to 8 boxes, for level 1 generally up to 6 boxes. Not a fixed rule on that, but it gives you an idea. So just split your paper up and you can create the same effect that you can see on the screen. So let's talk about this, but let's just double check first of all which order we need to do these in. You see here this total cost of the containers. We can't answer that. We don't know how many containers are needed, because we don't know how much stone fits into one container yet. So we need to look at that. So let's put that post-it note to the end. So the idea being is we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. We remove the post-it notes from in front of us that we can't currently do, and then we should end up with post-it notes in front of us that we can start to work with. We won't be able to work with £45.16 until we know how many containers there are. Until we know what decimal containers are needed, we're not going to be able to work out how many full containers there are. And if you just have a look at the other post-it notes, there's another one here. Ordering the smallest number of containers. Again, until we know what's needed, we can't make that decision as to whether how many we're going to have to buy. So we're sort of limited now. We sort of brought ourselves down to there are 5 post-it notes. We've got one with 60 tons. We've got the second row that's got information all about the containers, and we've got the one at the top on the third column that mentions meters cubed and tons. So you can see there are 2 post-it notes there that mention tons. So I would suggest you pop those next to each other so that those facts sort of stay together, and because you'll be working with those together. So you've now organised your information. If you're using post-it notes, you can reorganise it as we just have. If you're not using post-it notes and you've just created a grid on your paper, you can just put not yet, for example, on the ones on the right-hand side, and you can say waiting to know how many containers I need. You can give yourself little reasons why you can't do it yet. If that helps, you may not need to do that. So your starting point, I would always recommend to be working with the hidden facts. Okay. your hidden fact, the first one that has the greatest priority is the conversion. We recognise that we've got meters mentioned in here. We also have centimeters mentioned in here. Okay, we have pounds and we have tons as well, but tons is weight, pounds is money, but meters and centimeters are all to do with length, and we need to work in one consistent unit. So at the beginning of the question, you've identified whether you need to do a conversion, and at the beginning of the question is ideally when you should do the conversion. If you leave it to later in the question, it can become more complicated and it's not as straightforward as you might imagine. So we need to convert before you calculate, and we still haven't done any maths yet because we've gone through these 6 steps each way, and we've completed those. So it might take a long time, but actually it's taking longer for me because I'm explaining it to you, but when you actually get in the habit of doing this, it becomes quite a quick process. So the more you practice it before you go into an exam, the better you'll get at it. Okay, so we were starting with converting before you calculate. So we've got an issue here because we've got meters and centimeters. We've got to decide which one is the most appropriate one to convert to. Some questions it really doesn't matter at all, as long as you're in consistent units, so just centimeters or just meters, that's fine. But this question, it does matter. Later on, we have to convert from meters cubed to tons. So that means we need to be working in meters. So that helps us decide what numbers we need to convert. So when we have centimeters in here, that's not going to work for those calculations. So we need to change our centimeter numbers into meters. Okay, so let's have a look at those 2 post-it notes that relate to that. Okay, so you can imagine the other post-it notes are out the way. You're not focusing on those. You just focus on these 2 pieces of information. And let's pull out the fact that the first dimension is 80 centimeters, and we need to know what it is in meters. Okay, so 1 meter equals 100 centimeters. So when we convert from 1 to 100, we need to times by 100. So if you're going from meters to centimeters, you times by 100. But we're not. We're going back the other way. We're going from centimeters to meters. So we need to divide by 100. So there we go. We have our answer. So 80 divided by 100 equals 0.80. So let's pull that information up and put that on the post-it note above it. Okay. 0.80 is the same as 0.8. That far right 0 after a decimal point doesn't change its value. Okay. Now you could repeat the process in that middle post-it note using the 70 centimeters if you wanted to, but it's quite possible that you can see the pattern now that you've done it with one of the dimensions. You might be able to repeat that pattern sort of visually without working through it with full notes. So we can cover over that post-it note because we're done with that. And that's the beauty of it. When a post-it note is completed, when a box is completed, you can either put a tick through it or move it to the other side because you know you've dealt with it. Okay. Remembering, of course, if you use actual post-it notes, you need to write it on the exam. So we have 0.8 meters and 0.80 meters and 0.70 meters, which simplifies when we use it later on. Now, 3 dimensions relates to meters cubed, because meters to the power of 3 is meters cubed, and the power of 3 means it's 3 dimensions. So what you need to know now is what is the hidden fact here, and the hidden fact is that the volume is length times width times height, and we're going to use that now with our 3 dimensions at the top by timesing them together, and that gets us an answer of 0.448 meters cubed. At any point you need to stop the video to read through the information on the screen or rewind it, please do so. Okay, so we did our conversion. We then went on to work out the volume, and that post-it note is now complete too. And we have, and it's led us to an answer of 0.448 meters cubed. So at this point, if you're not sure what to do still, have a look to see if meters cubed is mentioned in any of the other post-it notes or boxes. And it is. It's actually mentioned over here on the left-hand side. So let's transfer that information we've just gained onto there, and we can now ignore that post-it note. So we're just taking the answer from the previous information across to here. Okay. So we have 1 meters cubed of stone equaling 1.8 tons. Now we now know that one container will hold 0.448 meters cubed. Decimals are not a favourite. A lot of people won't know what necessarily to do with this because our brain tells us that we can't work with decimals. So if your brain works that way, you could temporarily change that to a whole number instead of a decimal, just to trick your brain. So for example, if you said that that was 4 meters cubed, our brain would go, oh, that means you times that 1.8 by 4. So you know what to do. Your brain knows what to do. So trick it. Give it a whole number to work with. Then it will tell you what operation to do, whether you're timesing or dividing or multiplying. Timesing or dividing or adding or subtracting, for example. Okay, so once you've determined that you're actually going to multiply, we're going to do the sum 0.448 times 1.8, 0.448 multiplied by 1.8, and that will give us an answer that one container will hold 0.8064 tons. Okay, so from 1 meters cubed of stone being 1.8 tons, we've worked out that 0.448 meters cubed represents 0.8064 tons. So we've got one new piece of information that we can use, and that last bit of the answer was in tons. So we then go to the next post-it note that mentions tons and transfer that information to it. And the post-it note we've just completed, you can put to one side. So we've really step by step worked through this question in a way that perhaps you might not otherwise. Okay, so he needs 60 tons, and one container only holds less than 1 ton. It's sort of 0.8064. Number of ways you can do this. You can do a bit of trial and error. You can work out what maybe 10 containers will hold, and then 20, and you can scale it up, or you can do 0.8064 plus 0.8064 and add it repeatedly, but it's going to take you quite a long time to do it that way. So let's have a look at this. We're looking at how many containers are needed. How many do we need is a division. So you start with what you have or what you need. So he has 60. Divide is how many. So 60, how many 0.8064s go in it? 60 divided by the number tells you that we need 74.40479 containers. Okay, I would always leave your decimal numbers in there as much as possible partway through a question and leave the rounding till the end. Okay, you won't need the long decimal in this particular instance, but just leave it written down so the examiner can see that in your calculator that's the answer you got. Okay, so now we've worked out how many containers we need, but we do have a decimal answer. So let's have a look on the right hand side and have a look at where that information links up with. We need to look at that to bear in mind the smallest number of containers, so we need to use that number there. But we also need to look at the fact that they're looking for full containers, not part or decimal containers. So let's bring that information across. So we can now lose the information that we've just worked our way through, put it to one side, or just put a tick in the box. Don't cross everything out, just tick it to indicate to yourself that you've finished with that post-it note for now. So right, let's have a look at the slide that says order the smallest number of containers. It might be tempting at this point to round down to 74 because 75 would be too much stone, wouldn't it? But 74 won't be enough stone, so you have to be sensible when it comes to your rounding. This isn't mathematical rounding. This isn't rounding to the nearest number of containers. This is rounding to a number of containers that will give you the amount of stone that you need. Okay, so we know it's not going to be 74 because 74 would be just short of the 60 tons that he needs. We're going to have to go for 75. So we cover up that one. And now we're working with 75 containers. That fact can now be used to work with the cost, so we can cover that information up. And if one container costs £45.16, total cost of the containers is 75 lots of that cost, which is £3,387. And we've actually answered the question, just going through step by step. Post-it notes on paper rather than on the screen are much easier because you can go, no, not yet. And it might be you have two and you go, oh, I've worked that answer out now. Oh, that links with that. Off you go. And now I've got that answer. Oh, that links with that one. Off I go. So, you know, the beauty of actually working with post-it notes is that it makes it more tangible. You can move it around. But as I say, in an exam, that's not always practical. So let's have a look at all the information we've had. We started in the middle with the conversion. We then did the conversion of the container at the top. We then used those dimensions of the container at the top with the volume at the bottom. And each part then led to another post-it note that led to another post-it note and took us to the end. And you then find that you've answered a question you think you maybe couldn't have answered. There might be skills in there that you still need to work on, but and if you made an error partway through, but so you came up with a wrong number, if you then continued the question using the wrong number, you can still pick up some marks. So for example, on this one, if you had rounded it down to 74 containers by mistake and then went to work out the cost of 74 containers, you could still get a mark for working out the cost because you've actually used the right process to work out the cost. You wouldn't then get the final mark for the total cost of the containers, and you probably wouldn't get that mark. You wouldn't get that mark if it was there for deciding how many containers. So you'd lose a couple of marks, but you could still, if you continue, pick up some of the marks of the question. So don't give up, okay? So I have a question here. You might want to pause the video and you can do some practice. Let's just remind you first of all, your 6 steps to success. This is what you must do with these questions before you actually start doing any maths at all. Give your brain a chance to process. Give your brain a chance to put things in order. Don't allow part of your brain to rush ahead and cause havoc. Okay, and here we go back to the question. At this point, if you want to pause the video and give yourself time to do it, and I will reveal the initial thought processes that I started with in a moment. So the object of this activity right now is to practice withdrawing the information from the question that you need to work with. Right. If you wish to have a look at the start of an answer and the start of the process, you can press play, or could continue to play, but if you need a bit more time, pause again. There you go. So like I said, it's important that you consider how you're going to use this technique. Do practice it a lot at home. Do use it with post-it notes. Then maybe try it on a piece of paper so that when you're in the exam, you can work on the paper ideally. If you're doing an online exam, the post-it notes could be quite useful because you haven't got that paper to scribble on in the same way as you have on a paper-based exam. So give it a go, have a chat with your teacher and see if you need any further help talking it through, or play the video back again. And I hope this helps somebody.